each other's office, and we wouldn't knock or do anything courteous like that. We'd just bust in if the door was closed. We'd open it up and help ourselves. So I did this one day. I went down to his office and busted in. He's on a conference call. And so he hits the mute button on his phone, and we start talking like sailors, very unprofessional, and this went on for a little bit, and then all of a sudden the voice over the phone says, "Hey, who said that?" And I look at him, and I'm like, "You push the mute button." He goes, "Sometimes it doesn't work." So we're staring at each other, and the person on the phone, whoever it was relentless and wanted to know who said that. So I took the low road, and I went over to the phone, and I pushed, Mike had since gotten on mute. I took it off of mute, and I said, "Mike Smith." and I left and closed the door. And, he came up a little later. Mike didn't get mad very often, but he was not happy with me. We did go out for beers that night, so I guess it wasn't too bad. But this next story is Mike to a T. So Mike had a smoker, and he was on this. You all know Mike. He was a great cook and chef, and so he had a smoker, and I was trying to convince myself whether or not I wanted to get a smoker, if it's going to be a fad or not. And so I asked him for what he thought in terms of what smoker a guy should get. And in true Mike form, he had done some research. He had 14 pages, front and back, completed. And my research consisted of the last commercial that I seen. And so I went with the commercial that I saw on TV. So of course it's game on, bantering back and forth. His smoker did break, and he had to get a new one. I still have it. So he was kind enough to share his rub recipes, which I still have, and I still use, and I still will always use. They're labeled the Mike Smith recipes. And so I got my smoker, and I'm into doing my thing. And over the course of time, I'd done some pork shoulders. And so I asked Mike one time, I said, "Mike, what internal temperature do you take your pork shoulders off at?" And he looks at me just in true form, 203 degrees, you dumbass. It's like, not 200, not 205, but 203, the meat was frozen. So I proceeded to do my thing over the course of time, and when I did pork shoulders, I went out of my way to not take them off at 203, because I didn't want that little son of a bitch to be running. And then one time I was had an event at LTS, and Mike had done pork shoulders, and I'm helping pull them and shred them, and I go and grab one, I take the bone, and it just comes out, and there's not a morsel of meat on that bone. It was the most tender piece of pork I'd ever seen. I didn't tell him, of course, because guys never tell each other nice things. So, but from then on, I take mine off at 203 with his rub, and I always will. I guess the special part is I'll always remember him when I do that. But yeah, 203, you dumbass. So there you go. Last story, maybe more on a serious note. So when Mike and Cindy worked together, and it became obvious to some of us that were close to them that there was maybe more than just work. And he told me, maybe he actually knocked this time before I came to my office. Anyway, he said, "Hey, I got to talk to you tonight. Let's meet at Buffalo Wild Wings." All the important meetings went down at Buffalo Wild Wings for whatever reason. So I had a hunch. I knew what it was about, and but we met. Two of us met at Buffalo Wild Wings. And he told me he'd had feelings for Cindy, and I said, "I know." And he goes, "Well, how do you know?" I haven't told anybody. I said, "Well, your actions are pretty good. You got a little skip to your step, and it's pretty obvious to all of us. And he's deeply in love with you, and we're gonna miss him. We're gonna miss him." But, so if you got a beverage, a toast to Mike. Mike, we love you, brother.
Cheers. Cheers. For those that are fortunate enough not to know me, I'm Brad Hoover. Worked with Mike at Preventus for the last 7.5 years. I'll just start, my experience with Mike, and hopefully that resonates. First time I met Mike, I'd interviewed at Preventus, accepted a job there, quit my job at IBM, and 2 weeks was winding down, and the guy that hired me is like, oh, you didn't meet our CTO, Mike, and he kind of wants to meet you. And I'm like, well, this is an inopportune time for that. Anyway, quick lunch at the Green Mill or whatever it was at that time, waiting, and sure enough, this short little guy shows up with a sweatshirt and baggy pants. This is the guy that holds my future in his fate here. We had a good lunch, talked about a little bit of everything, and at the end it was clear to me he could have cared less whether I was capable of doing the job. He wanted to size me up. Would I fit? Would I be the right person for Preventus, bring the right personality, the right integrity? And that's what was important to Mike, right? And that was my start of the journey of getting to know Mike. And then we move on, and I'm starting at Preventus, and Mike and I were both early risers, early in the office. Every morning I would walk in, hey Mike, and hey, good morning. Always cordial, always had that time for you, but he was extremely efficient, right? And pretty soon we got into a routine where good morning Mike, and he would just wave at me, and it was always the same finger. Still very, very endearing. Sometimes, I'd have a question for him or whatever, and he'd show me both fingers, and it was very sentimental that way. But as time went on, so many of our colleagues had worked with Mike for many years, and I'm like, when do I get to know Mike, right? And because every time I talked to the guy, I learned something different about him. I'm like, I don't quite know him yet. And I came to the epiphany that in knowing Mike meant you were always evolving, because he was always evolving, right? It was, fishing or the food or the LTS, or there was always another layer to Mike, and that was what's so interesting about him, and something, you look at yourself and you're like, what am I doing here, right? You want to be like Mike. And then I'll just leave you with, I talked to a number of the people that have worked with and for Mike over the last few years at Preventus, and I think this, what I tried to boil down what they all told me, because it was very similar, and it was with kindness and respect that Mike could call you a dumbass.
Well done, guys. So for those of you that I haven't had the pleasure to meet, my name is John Utterstetter. I'm co-founder and CEO of Preventus, and Mike was employee number 8. So I'm going to give you a little background on how he joined and when he joined and what we accomplished together. I was writing down some thoughts this morning, and I said, how do you title something like this? Mike Smith is such an amazing individual. And so the only thing I came up with is God's special gift to life, right? This man touched everyone in this room, and thousands and thousands of people additional. When I first heard about Mike Smith, I was at IBM yet, and I remember Mike's manager coming in and saying, this was over 25 years ago, saying, John, you gotta meet this guy. He's Michigan Tech, he's a short guy, but his brain is powerful, and he's a big thinker. And I said, okay, so my normal stat, walk around and get to know him. Over 25 years ago, I just thought this is a real special individual. And I left IBM and started a company, and we started talking a little bit less than I used to meet at IBM, and I miss those days. And after, I think Mike journeyed on through life at IBM, and I would see him in an occasional Thomas Shack Christmas party, or once in a while I'd be here in town, and we'd stop. And you know what really impressed me was this man's genuine interest in you as an individual. He was always asking, hey, how you doing? What's life? What's going on, And between that attitude and the sweatshirts, I think he never changed. He was such a cool dude. I have one story. We were building up Preventus, and we were negotiating with the Italians over in Milano, and we spent quite a bit of time there in the first early days of the company to help build the device. And Mike was the kind of guy where he'd fly in at the very last opportunity to get there. He'd literally work all night. He'd get in these negotiations, and like many business meetings, they're frustrating, right? At times you get frustrated. This guy is as cool and as calm and as a pleasure to work with as you could ever expect. So one night, Wednesday, it was a Wednesday night in Milan, and for those of you who've been to Milan, it's kind of a happening place. And I said, Mike, we're getting to the end of negotiations. Let's go out and have a drink or so. And he goes, well, that's great. I'll take my car. I'm thinking, you got a car in Milan? Most Malaysian or French don't have their own cars. He goes, no, I can get you all in on this. We go out there, and it's one of these little smart box cars. Right? I said, Mike, you could have gotten a different car. He goes, no, this is the way to see the world. And you know, the guy was just full of life. Every event, whether he was cooking, whether he was teaching somebody new something, whether he was experiencing any aspect of the company growth or his social life, he was always fire and energy and fun. And I want to say Cindy was a part of that. You know, I like where Dave was going with this. I mean, Cindy was a rock for him. And he worked, he loved the company, he loved people, and he loved his wife. And Cindy, you were amazing. You set the tempo, really set the tempo. My wife, the co-founder's wife, Steph, and where's, I don't know, I think Greg's here, Joan, I don't know if Joan's here. You know, it does start with that core group of people that are so patient and rock solid and want to be a part of the people they're hiring and teaching. He was an amazing teacher. He had the patience of a saint. He would talk, he would be comfortable. He did use the word dumbass more than once. And it became known. But yet, even if you had the dumbest question and he thought it was really stupid, he would take the time to understand why you asked it. He was genuine about wanting you to be a part of the team, etc. He was an amazing individual. So we really are going to miss him. We really will miss him. So I wrote down some words, and it's not to say these are the only words, but there's a few here that I really wanted to try to take a minute. I might have the wrong button here. Okay, so when I said, what are the 5 or 6 top attributes of Mike Smith? The first word I wrote down, exemplary kindness, the first point I made, exemplary. I mean, there's nothing to say about another individual like that. Full of love for life and people that he touched, amazingly patient, witty humor. It was funny. We would go out to a lot of the Wild games and with Cindy and just enjoy the evening, and his wit, his humor, whether it's sports, whether it's cars, whether it's work, the guy was fun to be with. He's wicked smart. Everybody knows how smart that man was. All the way back to when Mike Snyder said, you got to meet this guy. He's one of a kind. He's one of a kind. And he truly lived up to that. The last 2 I put in here is unbelievable commitment and work ethic. I know, Cindy, you know, I compared notes. Within hours of his passing, he was still sending emails. I mean, the guy just could not let go of. It was his love. It was his life. It was who he was. And we loved. I mean, he was just amazing to work with. And then last thing I said, just nothing but positive. I never have seen, Ivan and I were talking about this earlier. There were times in his career where, you know, the questions and the intensity of the work after all the hours, you would expect he would slam his hand down and some vulgarity would rip through his mouth. He never. In all those years of working with the man, such a balance, tremendous balance. So when I first heard from Cindy that we lost him, I kept thinking about a song from Tina Turner, right? And you know, there's a video, I think that's coming, I'll share it, but really, to Mike, you're simply the best. Well, you know how the song goes. Better than all the rest. I can't read. Better than anyone I ever met. So Mike, rest in peace. the last thing I would say, that's a good way to
Yep, that's a
transition.
good way to do it.